the concept that your money is not at the helm of anyone but you. And really one step further, you are in control of the wealth that you create and hold. It's something that is foreign to the majority of the world. And we have now a protocol with sound financial means and sound money principles that exists in Bitcoin. And obviously, it's the only way to be financially sovereign is to be in full control of the money that you have.
Welcome to the first episode of the Block Reward. My name is Scott Deedles. I'm the host. I'm also the CEO and founder of Block Rewards, which is a Canadian company dedicated to helping Canadian employers integrate Bitcoin into compensation and benefits. The idea with the Block Reward podcast is to have Bitcoin conversations for non-Bitcoin audience. As a student of Bitcoin, I'm listening to Bitcoin podcasts all the time, and there are so many great podcasts in the space. And the challenge I have is finding ones that I can forward to friends and family and coworkers who don't know a lot about Bitcoin, where they can listen to it, stay engaged, and capture the important points without having to be fully immersed in the topic. So that's what we're trying to do here. My first guest is Adam O'Brien, and I'm really excited about having Adam on, and particularly as him being our first guest. Adam's somebody who's been an important person in my Bitcoin journey. Adam started a company called Bitcoin Well in Edmonton, Alberta in 2013. So he has been in the Bitcoin space for over a decade. Bitcoin Well is the world's first publicly traded ATM company, Bitcoin ATM company. So they do a lot more than just ATMs today. They have a suite of services around buying and selling and spending Bitcoin in the real world. Adam himself is a champion for figuring out how to use Bitcoin in daily life, and has a long history of being an educator and Bitcoin advocate himself. So I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you are interested or you're looking for the Bitcoin podcast that you can send to your friends who don't know anything about Bitcoin, I hope that's us. Like, subscribe. Send us feedback. I'm new at this, and I have just a mission to create great conversations that people can understand. So thanks for tuning in. I hope to see you again. All right, this is episode 1 of the Block Reward podcast, and we have Adam O'Brien.
Dude, the Genesis episode. I'm honored.
I am so pumped to have you on here, and really excited to get to talk to you today. So welcome. Adam, I wanted to start off the conversation today talking a little bit about your own journey in terms of how you found Bitcoin in the first place. And you are a unique person in the sense of you were a very early adopter.
Yeah. Kind of felt like my Bitcoin story is not unlike others that got into the space in that kind of 2013 era. I myself am not very technical, so I'm not I didn't grow up programming or anything like that. So kind of fell into this weird niche of reading, but I've always been very technically savvy on kind of the front end. So I was always pretty comfortable with computers, always knew right away how technology, generally should work, but how it does work. And then found Bitcoin. I don't remember exactly specifically where, but it had just kind of reached $100. And I thought, wow, look at this fake internet money worth $100. Like, what a joke. Let me look at this a bit more and, be the hero on Reddit, or be the hero on, in my friend group that kind of debunked this thing. None of my friends, none of my circle had really heard about Bitcoin at that time. So it was really starting from scratch. There was no one that I knew to talk to that was like, hey, what's this Bitcoin thing? Have you heard of this? Why is it $100? Why was it 30 a few months ago? Et cetera, et cetera. And so I just dove into Bitcoin. And I mean, like, as someone who is actively orange pilled, someone who's actively in the Bitcoin space, when you hear about and then start learning about Bitcoin, it's not really Bitcoin. You're learning about economics, you're learning about the history of money, fiat, our current monetary policy. And then on the technology side, you're learning about encryption, you're learning about all these different worldly things that exist that the Bitcoin protocol kind of just puts together. That's one thing that I found so fascinating. Recently I just went and watched Oppenheimer, and I found it so fascinating that they invented nothing. they just simply took things that already existed and put them together to create, boom. And Bitcoin is kind of the same way. Like it really, it dates back to World War II. It dates back to early World War II encryption models. And, Bitcoin as a result is like almost 100 years in the making. Like it's really quite poetic when you think about it. So anyways, all that to say, 2013, I'm like, what am I, 20? Yeah, almost 20 years old. Hear about Bitcoin and then just dive straight in. And for 6 months, like you can ask my now wife, my girlfriend at the time, I'm a complete bear. I'm not doing anything else. Like I'm just reading and uncovering things and then diving over. And, at that time, the IRC chats were big. So I was just like engulfed in these IRC chats and really learning a ton, as much as I possibly could. Now, like you go to YouTube, you catch, any number, like this podcast, for example, any other number of content creators, everyone's got an opinion and they've kind of done that work for you. But I was really just like thrust into doing the work kind of myself, I guess. And eventually like set up a Bitcoin node, which was really the only way to get a Bitcoin wallet at the time. And bought my first Bitcoin at that time. And I had a horrible experience buying my first Bitcoin. It was like there were no companies. We did actually have a company in Canada called CA Vertex. Verification took months, like 4 or 5 months. I like to get things done faster. So I opted. There was like 2 options. It was like, send money to sketchy exchange or like back alley. And so kind of opted for the back alley experience. Some time had passed and there was some really glitchy, it was called blockchain. The blockchain wallet that we know today existed back then. And it was only available on iOS. It was super buggy, super sketchy. So I downloaded that. The guy jumped into my car at like this stabby part of White Avenue, like where, you have no business doing deals unless they're for illicit drugs. And he like scanned my QR code. I gave him $100 and he left. And I was like, oh man, what a scam. Like, all the research, none of that mattered. It was like huge scam. Like this sucked. And went home, kind of saw a confirmation on the buggy iOS app. And I was like, okay, well, confirmations are good. This is positive. And then went to go sell said Bitcoin. Ended up selling 0.9 of the Bitcoin for $100. Basically had 0.1 Bitcoin. And I was like, okay, this is cool. You can buy it. You can sell it peer to peer. Like I needed blockchain in the middle, but I knew that I did some internal transactions with my own wallets and kind of knew that was the start. That was how everything started. And then from there, bought some Bitcoin ATMs. And I mean, I'm sure we can get into the rest of the story later, but that kind of original first experience, it was like, holy smokes, this is real. This is very, very cool. And ended up learning a ton about it and dedicating my life towards making Bitcoin easier to use.
So, yeah, I mean, if you think about, as somebody who's newer to the space, at that time, there would have been so much unknown. Like people really would not have known where it was going, and we still don't. But so would you say that was the moment for you where you started to realize this is a legitimate thing. This has some substance. Was there a light bulb moment that you recall where you started to understand?
Not so much from now I look at it from a sovereignty angle, and it's obviously very, very apparent, what you need to be financially sovereign is Bitcoin. There's no way around that. And that wasn't always apparent to me. The kind of light bulb for me was more on the business of selling Bitcoin. And it was, I remember I was like getting a deal done, driving to Calgary in a blizzard. And I was able to, I made a ton of money on a deal. And I remember driving being like, I think I made $7,000. And that was like more money than I'd ever seen in my life. That was like absolutely insane. I went to, I remember I was like driving like, holy smokes, like, this could be a real business. This is like, at that time I was still a bartender and I was still kind of working in the restaurant industry. And I was like, this is real. Like this is going to be absolutely game changing. This is a real business. And I remember I went to Best Buy and I bought, at that time, my phone. I was always on my phone and my phone battery sucked. And I couldn't afford at that time like a real charging case. And so I went to Best Buy, bought a charging case. I was like I've made it now. This is 100% what needs to happen. But I feel like I was a little bit at an advantage because the people that understood Bitcoin at that time, they also understood sound money and they also understood economics. And I had the benefit of probably, I guess, figuring that out much sooner than today. There's lots of noise. There's a ton of noise today because of the price, because, what are we at? Like, whatever, 25, 30K USD, wherever the price is, especially whenever the price when this airs. But like none of that noise existed. Nobody's life financially had changed, at least in my scene, from Bitcoin. Very, very few people had earned financial, like independent wealth from Bitcoin at that time. So there was no noise. It was all project focused. It was all protocol focused. It was all visionaries that were in the space, truly understanding what it meant, and with the goal of freedom, not of wealth. And those two things kind of go hand in hand. But I think primarily speaking, it was a freedom focused mission at first. And then all the crypto bros come in and Wall Street gets on board and it becomes very noisy and all about like day trading and blah, blah, blah. But it was freedom first. And I think I had the advantage of being like injecting myself in that space, which I think helped shape my views and my mission with Bitcoin well.
For sure. So you've essentially come into adulthood being fully immersed in these concepts of, you use the term financial sovereignty. Like, what does that mean? That for someone who's a total outsider to Bitcoin, what is financial sovereignty?
Yeah, it's the concept that your money is not at the helm of anyone but you. And really one step further, you are in control of the wealth that you create and hold. It's something that is foreign to the majority of the world. And it's something that it's easy to conceptualize for us, but it's not like in North America, but it's not easy for us to picture us being a victim of the financial oppression that like we see in Venezuela, for example, or Afghanistan. Like, when the Taliban took over in Afghanistan, banks were just done. Like that was it, right? Savings in the bank over, right? We own that now. Thank you very much. And it's like, oh yeah, like war-torn country, Afghanistan. That makes sense. That sucks. If only there was another way, but thank goodness we're not exposed to that here in Canada, which is just like not the case. Like we are exposed to that here in Canada. It won't be the Taliban taking it. It won't, hopefully not as a product of war. But in Canada, the measures exist and have been used to confiscate wealth. Dating back, you can't really see it, but sitting over my right shoulder here is the governmental or the Presidential Act of 1933, where the government confiscated effectively all of the gold in the country. And that was 90 years ago now. And then fast forward 45 years and the US dollar was no longer on the gold standard. And fast forward 50 years from that to where we are today, and we have spiraling debt that's out of control and no end in sight. And you can kind of easily see how all of these things are related on the macro. And it's easy to see the financial oppression that exists here in North America because we don't control the money, because the money is owned and controlled by a small group of individuals. And so the art or the key to being financially sovereign is just the effect that you aren't exposed to the decisions of politicians. You aren't exposed to a central bank or to anybody. You simply own and control the money. And of course, we need money. We need it. It would be great if we could just trade value for value. But that's not realistic. That's so unscalable. This is the reason money was invented in the first place. And we have now a protocol with sound financial means and sound money principles that exists in Bitcoin. And obviously, it's the only way to be financially sovereign is to everyone agree that sound money is this, and everyone does agree on the principles of sound money. But the only way to truly be sovereign is to be in full control of the money that you have. And in North America, like is 0.1% of the population even in control of their wealth? I don't think so.
maybe just for the benefit of anyone who is listening, what does that mean for you when you're talking about being in control of your money? Because obviously, when you're passionate about self custody and people controlling their own Bitcoin, but for everyone who's never owned a Bitcoin, like your money's in your bank. So doesn't that mean you are in control of your money?
It should, but of course it doesn't, and there's multiple reasons for that. Like I personally have had many different experiences with the banks just freezing funds, closing my accounts. I don't have access to my money anymore, and it's petrifying. The fact that your money, like we all know that custody is 9/10 of the law. We know this from when we're a young age. Doesn't matter if you own the hockey card or you own the Pokemon card or whatever. If you don't have it and somebody else does, they can go trade it, right? From a young age, when we were trading collectibles on the playground, we understand that unless you have the card in your hand, it is completely useless to you. And the same is true of money here in 2023. We saw recently in Canada anyways, we saw the trucker protests, we saw donations flying in for that, and we saw thousands of bank accounts getting frozen as a result of that. Like that in and of itself is an act where the banks made the decision based on the government's early action to not let you have control of your money. I mean, even without that incident, let's take that out of the equation. Banks are open 40 hours a week, sometimes a little bit less. I know like some of the banks open from 10 to 4 Monday to Friday, and then like 11 to 2 on Saturday. Like, is that even 40 hours? What happens if you need the money? Most banks don't carry cash anymore. They'll only give you bank drafts. And so what do you do if you need money immediately? What do you do? Bank drafts are, of course, are only valid in Canada. Our money is kind of locked in this ecosystem that doesn't exist outside of the borders of Canada. And so like you realize how small your world becomes when your money is not borderless, when your money is at the helm of the bankers. I'm not sure if you've had this experience, but like I would encourage people who think the opposite to go to the bank, ask to wire $50,000 to a Bitcoin exchange. Just see the questions that you get, see the questions that get answered. And often it's met with no. Even if the money in your account is there, you've got all access to it. It's not like frozen or anything like that. Your bank account is fully valid with lots of money in it. The bank teller will restrict you from buying Bitcoin. It's shocking. It's absolutely shocking. And I think that reality is scary, especially as we start to talk about CBDCs and we see where the technology can start to go to limit our ability to spend our own money.
Yeah, I was just before this watching Peter McCormick's latest episode has Nigel Farage, and he's a British media personality on the show talking about how he's been financially censored. And it's amazing to me how many, it's Western countries right now, it's in the news, but Australia, the UK, obviously we talked about Canada. JP Morgan has censored a lot of high-profile individuals in the U.S. for kind of
yeah. Didn't Kanye get waxed? Was it JP Morgan or Chase that did him?
Yeah. Kanye, Dr. Mercola is another one. These people are just sort of espousing ideas that are not uniform to mainstream. And I mean, so I guess there's part of this would be there's going to be people who automatically identify with it's your money, you should be able to use it however you want. For people who maybe don't see that as such a pressing thing, like how would you speak to that?
Yeah, I actually didn't. It's funny. This is how entrenched in like my desire for freedom and sovereignty is. I didn't actually consider that anybody thought not having control of your money was good. Like I was on a podcast with a guy called Max Fawcett, and he's kind of like a left-wing person. He put a tweet out that was like, I want to learn more about Bitcoin. And I was like, great. And we're talking about that And he's like, well, if we were all in control of our money, then we could just use it however we wanted. And I was like, yeah. um, is that not what you want? He's like, well, what if I was bad? And I was like, well, then you should get arrested for doing bad things. We shouldn't limit everyone from using their money because a small subset of people are bad. Like, we don't put alcohol blowers in the cars because a small subset of people drink and drive. Like we understand this concept that, people use technology to do bad things, but we don't limit entire societies because they do. But it blew my mind that the narrative that, no, we do need oppression. We do need censorship in order to keep the world safe. And I if I'm being honest, I'm like, I have a really hard time conceptualizing that. I was talking with one of my buddies, and I was polling my friends. I was like, what does sovereignty mean? Like, just kind of get a bit of insight into normies or whatever. And one of them said, it's a made up word to make us feel oppressed. And I was like, what? Like, this is something that real people believe. And so, yeah, I think for people that don't believe that, admittedly, I'm probably not the best person to like ask, why, because it's hard for me to fathom a world in which we don't want to be free. But people that think that's possible, my common argument, and this handles both sides of the spectrum, is just imagine if you lived and you didn't agree with the current government. Like, it's easy for people on the left and the right to not agree with the other side. But it's harder to see the possible oppression when your side is in power. But like, something I say to my friends is like, okay, you agree with the government censoring for the freedom convoy, but what if they censored for, pick a left-wing cause, pride, pick a, like, whatever, any generic, like, typically left-wing kind of thing. What if they censored that? Would you be happy with that? And the answer is always no. So it's not so much the cause that's the problem, right? It, like, if you disagree with something, sure, you should be upset that is happening. But the fact that we could wish governments to be able to come in and swooping, let's like censor it, is a huge problem, because governments change every 4 years. And if your side doesn't get in and there's precedent to censoring things that are against the narrative, that's a huge problem, regardless of where you are on the spectrum. So I just, when you lower your time preference and break down the argument far enough, it's very, very difficult, I think, to see a logical response to wanting someone else in control of your money and ultimately of your decisions. I think that's a dangerous place to be in, and it always leads to oppression and death.
Yeah, you made a lot of great points there. Again, sort of just because part of the goal of this pod is to keep it as entry level as we can while we're still sort of talking about these subjects. How does a technology that enables people to sort of transact value directly with each other and store wealth outside of the traditional financial rails, like, how does it address these kinds of potential oppressions?
Yeah, this Bitcoin fixes everything talk. What is it, like a year and a half ago? That was a big Twitter trend, was just like, Bitcoin fixes that. And actually, I do fall into that camp. I quite frequently will hear something about, like, something completely unrelated to finance even, and I'm like, Bitcoin will fix that. Like, that's no problem. And it's just this concept that when you have control of your money, you've got, and when the money is fair, and I think this is less about control of the money, although that is a piece of it, and it's more about the monetary policy that backs your efforts, because money is a little bit useless. Bitcoin itself is useless if nobody is producing anything. Like, Bitcoin on a UBI system, completely useless. All stocks, all bonds, like everything in a UBI state is completely useless because there's no productivity backing the money. The point of money, back to like, I don't know, the ancient times, is to have a medium of exchange so that you could lock your value, right? If I'm a hairdresser, for example, I don't probably have much value for you. Like you know, you don't have any hair. So why would you why would you give me any of, if you were a cattle farmer and I was a hairdresser, I would have a very hard time getting any beef from you because maybe I could trim your beard a little bit, but so what happened is I have to cut someone else's hair, get something from him that you would like to trade your steaks for, or your milk, or whatever. And that's the point of money. It actually has nothing to do with the money. It has to do with the value that I can create cutting hair, the value that you can create growing, feeding, nurturing, and then butchering cattle, the value that somebody else can create as an artist in whatever form, or as a house builder, or as an energy producer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's that sound money policy that the money in and of itself is kind of irrelevant, but it forces everyone to produce, because unless you produce, you don't receive anything. It kind of like, we all understand that competition is good, right? If you're the single lone business at the top of the hill, you're not really driven. You're not driving forward. You're not reinvesting in yourself. There's no race. You're kind of getting like a bit lazy. And the same is true of individuals. When the money is like just manipulated and pure garbage without sound monetary policy, we get lazy and we don't produce. When we don't produce, we're not living to our fullest potential. I mean, there's literally, like, this goes back to like Bible times. Like, it talks about that in the Christian Bible, about how God wants us to produce. God wants us to take what we've got and distribute it and grow it, to add value and to add pleasure to the earth. And so I think it's human nature to want to produce, and broken monetary systems take away that kind of productivity level, which is dangerous, and you can see how it just stems and flows downhill from there.
So you just to touch on a few things you said there, sort of looking at control over your money as sort of two different categories, if I could paraphrase you a bit. And one of them is sort of being able to spend your money how you want. And the other aspect of it is not having the money that you have earned already lose its value through reckless monetary policy, which really every country in the world, particularly in the West right now, are really experiencing this sort of accelerated fallout from, expansion.
Reckless spending.
Right. Right. So for people in Canada, like, how do you say Bitcoin fixes this? Like, what is your explanation for people when you're trying to make sense of what you do and what you're offering? How is it the solution?
Yeah, Bitcoin is a long-term solution. And in the West, we have the luxury of being able to think long-term, but we don't. We are inherently forced into a short-term cycle. And it's kind of funny how everything is fixated around kind of a 1-year calendar. It's like, what's my budget for the year? What am I hoping to achieve this year? What are my goals, my financial goals? What trips are we going to take? What are we going to buy? What are our big expenses? What are we going to fix? Like, it's all about kind of a 1-year season. And I think Bitcoin automatically just flips that. It's a 4-year cycle for Bitcoin, roughly 210,000 blocks, which I think automatically elongates your time preference and your kind of view, your long-term view. But frankly, in Canada right now, we have seen the money supply triple. At one point, it was as high as quintuple in the last 3 years. 8% inflation is low. We are seeing way, way, way higher than 8% inflation. And you can tell by like the prices everywhere. Somehow the narrative is corporate greed, even though profits are at record highs when you don't consider all the inflation.
Right.
So it's like, yeah, like you're making more money than you've ever made, yet somehow you have less purchasing power, not because of corporate greed, but because of inflation. Number go up is irrelevant in an unlimited, in an infinite monetary sum game, because you have no reference point. There is no like if you own $1 billion, if you have $1 billion, that is a percentage of the entire wealth in the world. And if that billion goes to 2 billion, but the entire percentage doesn't change, you have amassed more wealth. If that billion goes to 2 billion, but the entire monetary sum also doubles, you're the same. It feels like you've doubled your money, but it's just the same. You have the same purchasing power on a total macro layer. And the problem is in Canada, we have monetary supply tripling over the last 3.5 years now, and savings aren't being tripled. Wages aren't being tripled. Everything is going up in value, in price, sorry, not in value. Everything's going up in price, but the value is staying the same. The value of your dollar is decreasing because it can buy you less. And so, people that I say that to go, well, my value just lost 10% in Bitcoin last night. So how could that be? Yeah, Bitcoin's crazy volatile. We have this insane technology that's 15 years old that's literally designed to be a global macro tool. And we're in early days. I think that you think about the difference, like, it's a little bit more than entry level, but part of the Bitcoin protocol is the halving and how many coins are introduced into circulation at any given time. And we've seen that go from 50 at one point to today where it's just over 6 over the course of time. That's a massive decrease. And with all that, there's just turbulence. And then secondary to that, your dollar literally loses crazy amounts of purchasing power overnight when energy prices double, when gas and like vehicle gas prices double, when your property tax goes up 10%. What is that coming from? Like that is all volatility. It's just stretched out. We can't really track the dollar against consumer price index very well because consumer price indexes are always lagging and the cost of a dollar is always lagging. We don't have that direct comparison like we do in Bitcoin. But if we did, and if we could see it in real time, my guess the dollar would be way more volatile than Bitcoin. Because when you track Bitcoin, when you track the purchase price of Bitcoin, I love tracking, like you see some tweets come up like iPhones in Bitcoin from
Price of a
inception
house
to
in
today.
Bitcoin. Yeah.
And it's like iPhone 4, 3,000 Bitcoin, iPhone 10 or iPhone X or whatever it was called, like 2 Bitcoin. And then iPhone 14, like 0.2 Bitcoin. Like you can really see how on a macro scale, your purchasing power increases with Bitcoin. And sure, there's volatility, but like that's always been a knock on Bitcoin. And yet somehow on a long time frame, purchasing power increases with Bitcoin. It's like, it's not science, it's math at this point. And math is super predictable. So it's quite easy to see. And I think anyone who doesn't agree or anyone who kind of disregards that doesn't have a long enough time view and frankly is just trapped in the fiat rat race, which is unfortunately a lot of people.
Yeah. So as we're recording this episode right now, we're in the middle of this sort of viral trend where people are sharing these videos on TikTok and Instagram and Twitter that are, I'm giving up. I can't afford to live in Canada anymore. And you're seeing this, like people all over the country, people, Canadians, people who are immigrants. This is really, honestly, tragic phenomenon. And we have this, it's such an abstract problem for people to conceptualize where we observe the loss of the purchasing power of money in the things in our daily life getting more expensive without really understanding that what that's a reflection of is that the money that we're using itself is just going less and less far. Like every dollar becomes less and less valuable. And I think it's partly compounding in Canada, especially because of the mirage of Canadian real estate. So a lot of people have been able to successfully sort of bolster their income by selling their house every 3 or 4 years at a massive profit. And it's this, fiat illusion of everyone's getting rich. And this, as long as the price of the things you own goes up faster than the price of the things you need to buy, then, enough people are going to be fine with it. And it does feel like we're approaching a little bit of an inflection point, which is part of the reason why I wanted to start this pod, because I think it's just really important for, it's time for more and more people to start, kind of hearing these concepts in a more digestible way. Yeah,
man. No, I think like real estate is actually a really fascinating thing to look at, because real estate in and of itself is also very volatile. The problem with real estate is that it's not very liquid. So you can't see the booms and busts of real estate like you can in Bitcoin. But it's shocking. And the cost to own real estate is out of hand and only going to get more and more expensive. I mean, thinking of Bitcoin fixes this, and if you let me ramble for a minute here, there's this concept that like when the money sucks, we're shortening our time preference. Meaning we have a shorter look, which means we have to produce things faster because people want things faster, because they're not thinking like, who cares when I'm 40? I'm 30 right now. I need something right now. So now we've got this shorter time preference. Higher time preference is kind of the proper term there. So we've got things being made faster. Well, you know the saying, you can have things fast, cheap, or good. Pick two. And often it's fast and cheap, not good. So things run out faster, which means all those crappy made things that are made fast get pumped into a home and they have to be maintained. So now, instead of every 30 years for a new furnace, it's every 10. Instead of every 10 years for a new fridge, it's every 2. Instead of every 20 years for a new septic tank, it's every 10, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So more, and then as time goes on, your money gets less and less valuable, making all that stuff more and more expensive. We're just kind of getting caught right now in this death spiral down where real estate is going to become a massive burden. And that's when the rug gets pulled, the string gets pulled, whatever it might be, the straw that breaks the camel's back is going to be when people can no longer afford to maintain their homes simply because they're made so poorly and yet still cost so much to maintain. Boom. Like we are completely wrecked. Forget interest rates, forget property taxes. When just the cost to live in your house exceeds what it would have been otherwise, exceeds the cost to buy a new one, that's when we're in trouble.
Interesting. Yeah, I love to sort of talk to people about real estate. You know, it's a pet topic of mine too. And people will hammer on the volatility of Bitcoin. But if someone was checking the price of their house 4 times an hour, nobody would be able to own a house. Like, you know, we just don't do that. So,
Dude,
yeah.
So true.
So, just to get back to this financial censorship topic for one more question, you're a really interesting example because you are the CEO of a publicly traded company in Canada. And as far as I know, and we've talked about this, you don't have a criminal record, you've never done anything else, you know, you've never been arrested or anything. And you have a tremendously hard time interacting with traditional financial institutions and basic things like getting a bank account.
Yeah, man. It's and I think like I am an edge case here, but it is super, super telling, I think, how the world can go where, like you said, I'm not a criminal. In fact, we pay an exuberant amount of taxes over our years as a company. I personally pay crazy amounts of taxes. At the same time, the banks don't want me as part of their ecosystem. And it's funny because every bank says the same thing. Doesn't work with our bank, but you can go somewhere else. And it's like, well, no, because now that circle is complete. Like we only have 5 banks here in Canada.
Right.
There's not many more that I can go to once all 5 have said no. And I think that just goes to show that's just the banks. So that's one side. And people have talked to me about this in the past, have been like, you must be so upset. And actually, no, you know what? The banks should have the ability to do business with whomever they please. I believe that in a free market, in a free country, you can choose who you can and cannot. The bigger problem here is that our government has eliminated the ability to use cash to do things. You can't buy a house with cash. I've tried. You can't buy a car with cash. I've tried. You can't pay your taxes in cash. I've tried. And so I can both be excluded from the banking system while also not have the ability to use legal tender in the country. And that's a huge problem. That full circle macro is a huge problem in my mind, where we don't really see the full consequences of it until we're thrust straight into it. We don't really know what it means because we can't, like, what do you mean you can't use cash? Of course you can. But why would you have that much cash to a bank, right? Until the banks say no. Or even worse, your money's in a bank and then the bank says no. And you can't buy that house because of X, Y, and Z. Then all of a sudden you've pissed someone off in an office in Toronto, and then your money's frozen. And that's where the problems come in, when you are exposed to the decisions of some private companies, some private individuals on the banks, and the government is no support in their legal tender, which I think is problematic. And you hear, well, cash is only used for drugs and cash is bad because of X, Y, and Z. Sure, right? All those things are true. Cars kill people every single day. Every single day, someone is ran over by a car. At least one person in Canada is hit by a car, right? But we still all drive cars to work. And we found ways to make technologies or to overlook the tragedy that some technologies bring because they're a net benefit to society. Money's not been the case. And unfortunately, the censorship is always the answer, is always the solution. I'm putting solution maybe in air quotes to the problems that money can bring about. But that shouldn't be the answer because you end up just, things never get less censored, right? Like
Right.
it only ever gets more and more and more and more as we discover more and more and more edge cases. And I think that's a huge problem.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with you on that statement of banks should be able to choose whoever they do business with. This is a point actually Robert Kennedy Jr. brought up a few weeks ago, talking about. I mean, sure, they are private businesses, but if you need to have access to that service to be a functioning member of society, and you've not broken any laws.
See, but that's the problem, is that you need to have access to that service, right? Like why isn't there a world in where you don't need access? Cash works just fine, and there should be no need to use a bank. In fact, a bank should be seen as a luxury item, not a required item. Again, in my mind, and I know what you mean, where like banks are required, so they shouldn't be luxuries. But like, no, banks just shouldn't be required. It's kind of my, and in a Bitcoin standard, they're really not. Peer-to-peer technology enables the ability to use money without using a bank in the middle.
Yeah, and it really is. Bitcoin will evolve into being able to do things that it can't do today, but you really are able today to store your wealth personally. I mean, it takes some learning and a little bit of gut check here and there, but it can be done. I think a lot of people, I've seen you talk a lot about cash, and I know you use a lot of cash where you can. Christine Lagarde, who's the head of the ECB, was viral a few weeks ago talking about how they, with their CBDC program in Europe, will have the potential to restrict transactions up to 400 euros. So basically, that will be the maximum amount that somebody will be able to have an uncensored or sort of quasi-anonymous transaction. Do you think people in Canada, just generally speaking, have any sense for how serious and fast approaching the possibility of a broad financial censorship is?
No, and the scary thing about that too is that number only goes down. Like $400 is one thing. The AML, like the anti-money laundering number in Canada, has been $10,000 since like the 70s. Like, do you know how far $10,000 went? Like that was like, you could buy a car relatively anonymously. You could maybe even actually almost buy a house relatively anonymously in the 70s. I'm being a little bit facetious there to make a point, but like today, $10,000, like that's less than a set of tires on a luxury vehicle. Like talk about the comparison from what it bought you a car to what buys you tires. Pretty insane to think about the difference. And that $400, like that's not a grocery bill anymore. I know my family of 6, like we spend more than that on groceries every single week. And it's not hard to see how that turns into every single transaction is censored. And then it's like, oh, well, I'm doing nothing wrong. So what's the problem? Well, you might be doing nothing wrong under the current regime, but those regimes constantly change. And what happens when eating beef is wrong? What happens when leaving your lights on for more than 3 hours a day is wrong? What happens when you can no longer buy cotton because or you can't buy certain materials for your clothing because that's wrong? When you can't drive more than 100 kilometers a month because your 15-minute city should be good enough. We don't want you to pollute the earth. Like what happens when not getting a medicine is wrong? All of these things become so impactful when you realize, well, that's wrong. Well, define wrong. tell me that won't change. I laugh at the fact, like 2 years ago, I wasn't able to walk in to watch my son play hockey because
Yeah.
I was a danger to society as an unvaccinated individual. Like, it blows my mind how quickly wrong can change.
Yeah. Yeah. And as a control apparatus, money sort of represents the ultimate noose, right? Without,
Yeah.
so this gets back to your sort of original point about financial sovereignty. And yeah.
Well, I mean, even further, like, what does that push people to do, right? I mean, it's interesting to kind of conceptualize. Obviously, we have Bitcoin and this kind of solves it. But if you're truly like anti-Bitcoin and you don't really want to use it, all of a sudden we turn into this, we make our own little societal currencies. And it's like, well, we can't use money, but I grow eggs and you cut grass. So why don't we just trade? You cut my grass once a week and I'll give you, whatever, 3 dozen eggs a week or a month or whatever. And now you've got excess eggs. So you can go to the next store. Like, this is like back to the early days. This is back to even before the Romans. Like this is where currencies start to live, because the existing way of doing things doesn't work. Do stores, does this end up crippling stores because money is so useless, because it's so censored, that stores no longer work? And it's just back, people will always desire to be free, and people that can actually produce will always have a better way to be free. And so you better believe that when money becomes useless, the capitalists and the productive unit of society are going to have better ways to transact. Bitcoin's the obvious answer. And so we're lucky we don't have to think about the money piece, but it's an interesting thought exercise anyways.
For sure. And it's a great segue to talk a little bit about Bitcoin. Well, you guys are a Bitcoin services company, and I know you have a lot of ideas about how you're going to help Canadians with this transition, and other countries too. Maybe just talk to me a little bit about your vision of how this continues to become a more and more of a daily part. And this is something I run into a lot. And talking to people about Bitcoin is like, well, I can't pay for my Starbucks with Bitcoin right now, so obviously it's a scam. And
yeah, you can't buy eggs with your Starbucks gift card, and yet somehow you have that. So
right.
Yeah, no, man. I mean, the mission of the company is to enable independence. 2 words, very simple, freedom focused. We want to enable independence through the convenient control of Bitcoin. Bitcoin's obviously a huge niche. And that's the starting place for independence. Money is kind of the root of the productivity of our lives. And without sound money, without the control of sound money, it's very difficult to live. So what we do is we make it easy to buy, sell, and use Bitcoin. You actually can use Bitcoin at Starbucks if you so choose. You go to bitcoinwell.com, buy a Starbucks gift card with Bitcoin, and then have that on a Starbucks app. Or use your credit card at Starbucks and then get the credit card points, and then pay your credit card off with Bitcoin at the end of the month at bitcoinwell.com. So we are making it there's 2 ways to increase Bitcoin adoption, and that's going the B2B route, which is what the banks have done. Let's force everyone to accept credit cards, and then everyone will have a credit card. And that's been 15 years in the making. I don't have the patience to wait for 15 years to be able to use my Bitcoin at Starbucks, at Walmart, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let's go the retail route. Let's give you the power to spend your Bitcoin over these legacy traditional finance rails. You all have a credit card in your hand. Always, everyone has a credit card. Maybe not everyone, but the majority of people do have a credit card. Let's just get them spending that normally, give them the ability to pay that credit card with Bitcoin at the end of the month. The next phase to that is obviously having a card of some kind that uses the existing payment rails, those Visa and MasterCard rails, but is tied to a hot wallet. How good would that be if you could own and control full self-custody of your money tied to a piece of plastic that just tap, 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 tap around the city or around the country? So technology like that is difficult to make, obviously, but our vision here is truly about independence. It's truly about giving people the ability to own and control their money. So we call it the benefits of Bitcoin with the convenience of modern banking. Modern banking is so damn easy to use. It's very slick. There's tons of money put into UX and design, and it's very, very impressive. It's all done though on a baseless sand system. Like their house is made on sand. And we all know, we listen to the Three Pigs. We know what happens when houses are made on sand and they're made of straw. We want to build, like Bitcoin's a brick house. We want you to have the ability to use that brick house, but still have the same luxuries and conveniences of modern banking. And that's why we're around.
I'd love to ask you, this is a little bit of a, obviously you guys are an unusual sense in that as a Bitcoin company, you're going to attract a certain kind of individual who wants to work for you guys. But maybe just talk to me a little bit about how you incorporate Bitcoin into your corporate culture and how that looks and feels, and maybe some things that you guys do.
Yeah, generally speaking, it's like such a mindset. Bitcoin is. It's so much bigger than just a financial instrument. We do generally attract most people that I think are encouraged by the aspect of freedom, that understand why Bitcoin exists, and that go through. We scaled up pretty fast over the last couple of years, and some feedback that I got from people that have since left was that we're like pretty libertarian group here, and I was kind of like, well, yeah, we're about freedom. We like, yeah, and they're like, well, like it was difficult for them to kind of see that. Like difficult for them to see themselves in the company culture just because we're so freedom and independence focused. Other things like we have a Bitcoin savings plan, which I absolutely love. So again, as part of scaling up, we could have opted to go like the RSP matching or whatever, but we went Bitcoin matching. There's no tax benefits to it, obviously. But I've got some thoughts about the tax benefits of RSPs, maybe not being that great anyways, but the kind of thought process was, if you want to buy Bitcoin, we want to match how much Bitcoin you're buying on a monthly basis, and really encouraging people to be buying Bitcoin rather than buying like controlled RSPs or TFSAs or contributing to government restricted funds in some way. And I think that that alongside with just the way that like the types of events that we do and run here, I think corporate culture is in many times a mindset, and it starts obviously with the CEO, but it kind of flows through the organization down to, I think, who you hire is most important. And hiring someone, when you ask them why is Bitcoin cool, number go up doesn't really, strike the needle. It's because I'm in control. It's because it's fully encrypted. It's because I think it's empowering that I can own and control my wealth. It's empowering that I can send money to my cousin in Australia in a matter of seconds for no cost. It's empowering that it's protocol focused, and if I care enough, I can develop a proposal to change the protocol. It's empowering in that I can have a Bitcoin miner running. I can run my own node. Like all this stuff is empowering, and it empowers the individual first. It's not because I made 10% last month. And I think that's the main difference behind like why we're here, why we exist. It's again less about number go up, less about like turn your 30K into 40K, and a lot more about turn your garbage, useless money into sound money.
Those are some triggering statements for a lot of people who there's a lot of pondering that comes along with the realization of that some of these problems are sort of systemic and structural to the way that our money fundamentally works. What would you say, if I could put you on the spot and say, what is one thing that you think everybody who doesn't know anything about Bitcoin needs to know?
One thing everybody who doesn't know something about Bitcoin needs to know, I would say the concept of sound money, the concept of what's important for you and your money. Your money is not just ones and zeros in your bank account. It's the relative kind of collection of your efforts and then the costs to get there. And I think that if people understood how important sound money is, the concept of like the base, like money has to be transferable and divisible and scarce and different aspects of what sound money is, I think that would probably move the needle a lot more. There's very few people that I've conversed with that understood the need and the desire for sound money that didn't get Bitcoin. I mean, Peter Schiff's an outlier. I think that he does it just for the views. But I was lucky enough to have dinner with Pierre Poilievre a few years ago, kind of before his big Bitcoin tour. And he is someone that understands sound money and sound monetary policy. And explaining Bitcoin to him, it was just like, you could just see the eye opening. Like, oh yeah, check. Like Bitcoin handles all of this so well. And it was interesting. It's so much easier to like orange pill or to tell someone about Bitcoin when they understand the value prop of Bitcoin. But if you're kind of screaming into an empty room, like if they don't understand why sound money, they don't understand why that's important, then it's difficult to, pitch Bitcoin. It's like my conversation earlier, we talked about like, wow, you can't possibly think that we all want full control of our money. That would be dangerous. It's like, why? Like, holy smokes. Like, you got a lot to learn before you're going to truly appreciate Bitcoin. And I think that, I would say sound money.
It is a really interesting topic. And I think, the idea of money being so valuable in and of itself that you might want to have it instead of having a consumable good is so foreign to us. And that's a symptom of how deep the conditioning is in terms of, you basically, it does literally burn a hole in your pocket. You spend your money sort of not realizing that, a lot of our consumer driven behaviors have a lot to do with the fact that we know on some level our money is continuously buying us less and less. And if all of a sudden confronted with the possibility of just being able to have a money that was even just holding its value or possibly becoming more valuable, I mean, this is part of what sound money is, right? It's having the freedom to not have to spend your money furiously, knowing that house of sand is falling apart,
disintegrating. Yeah, I mean, it's the luxury our ancestors had with the gold standard. Like, when you had a brick of gold, you weren't in a rush to spend it. You also, moreover, when you did spend it, it had to be on quality. Like, there was no plastic toys and a Happy Meal from McDonald's, because that's not what I want. I want something nutritious that will fill me up, that will give me energy to continue my day and to produce. There was no like quick, fast, let's get the cheapest, most garbage thing because we're on the run to the next thing in order to get by. And it does completely change that mindset.
So you're pretty far along in your education. I'm curious, is there a Bitcoin resource, book or a podcast, or even just a personality in the space that you enjoy or refer to other people? Like for those who are just starting to get in and are looking for some great resources, what are some of your go-tos or things that you like to tell other people about?
Yeah, the Bitcoin standard is definitely an obvious one. That's a tough one, though. To be honest, I don't like when people recommend it as the first read, because it's a tough read and it's technical and it's difficult to I think to get through if you're not passionate about Bitcoin. I'm listening to Atlas Shrugged right now for like another time as a hardened Bitcoiner. That book hits home, and I wonder if it would for other people. It's got nothing to do with Bitcoin, obviously. It was written like 70 years ago or something like that. But it is easy to see how Bitcoin solves that. The Sovereign Individual is kind of like a follow-up to Atlas Shrugged. And so I think both of those books, Bitcoin, again, it's like there are some technical skills that are required in Bitcoin. Just like there's a technical skill to using email. You have to set it up. You have to understand what you're doing. But the benefits of having that skill are well worth the investment. The difference is Bitcoin is financially driven. And I think people need to be philosophically aligned with why they're interested in Bitcoin before they just jump in and start doing Bitcoin things. And so I would say, as far as I'm concerned, I think understanding why they want to get into Bitcoin. If you're looking to jump into Bitcoin and exit after 100% return, just don't. There are better things to get 100% return on in the world. When you're ready to buy Bitcoin and you're ready not to sell it at $1 million, at $1 billion, Bitcoin will be $1 billion one day without question. Not necessarily because it'll buy you $1 billion worth of things today, but because the US dollar, the Canadian dollar, Western dollars are going to be inflated to the point where $1 billion is just what things cost. And I think that you need to have, like, you don't sell sound money because number went up. You sell sound money as savings when you need it, when you want to go on a trip, when you want to buy something that you're going to enjoy, that you're going to use, when you want to invest in something for yourself and your productivity, etc. So I think it's philosophically, and I think you need to research sound money, and you need to research why this concept of financial sovereignty is so important. And I think like Ben from BTC Sessions does a pretty good job of mixing both up. He's very, very focused on understanding that Bitcoin should be held and controlled by yourself. Like I talk about that all the time. That's one of my go-tos. That's why Bitcoin's so important to me. But I would really encourage people to understand why they're excited about Bitcoin before they understand how to do Bitcoin things.
That's awesome, man. That's a great answer. I appreciate your passion for the space, dude. And Bitcoin Well is a great company doing a lot of different things, cool products and services, ways to interact with Bitcoin. And it's bitcoinwell.com if you want to go down there and have a look. Episode number 1 down.
Dude, well done. This is great.
Thanks again, Adam. Appreciate you. I would love to have you back again sometime and talk Bitcoin anytime.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Block Reward. We're trying to do something different here, creating accessible conversations meant for people who aren't obsessed with Bitcoin. If you found this episode informative and engaging, hit that subscribe button to make sure you stay updated with future episodes. Your feedback matters. We'd greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to share your reviews and help us with our goal of creating Bitcoin content that is simple and easy to understand. Bitcoin has an important role to play in the future of finance. It will change the way we save, spend, and invest. Discover why Bitcoin offers a game-changing opportunity for forward-thinking employers by visiting blockrewards.ca. Block Rewards' mission is helping Canadian employers implement strategies for integrating Bitcoin into compensation and benefits, supercharge your recruitment and retention strategies, and help your team members plan for the rising cost of living by rewarding their work with the hardest money ever invented. Special thanks to our top sponsor, Paramount Employee Benefits Consulting, Canada's only Bitcoin-forward benefits and pension advisory. For more information, find them at paramountbenefits.ca. Big shout out to Podigy, our production team that makes all this possible, and BMX Escape for producing our music. Bitcoin is an expansive and dense topic many people walk away from early. To Bitcoin enthusiasts looking for that podcast they can share with friends, family, and colleagues, one they'll actually listen to, we hope that is us. The content of these conversations is meant to be provided for information purposes only. Nothing here is investment advice. Bitcoin is a big topic. Be sure to do your own research before making any personal financial decisions. Thanks for listening.